The Eclipse sailed through the void, its engines humming steadily as it approached the Velan stronghold. The target was Kalos Prime, a heavily fortified planet that served as one of the Empire's key military hubs. It wasn't just any world, it was a symbol of Velan dominance, a place where their power was absolute. Taking it down would send shockwaves through the alien empire, proving to them and to humanity itself that resistance was possible. Daniel stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The planet loomed large now, its surface covered in sprawling cities and towering defense grids. Energy shields shimmered faintly around key installations, protecting the heart of the Velan operation. It was an intimidating sight, but Daniel refused to let fear take hold. He had come too far to back down now. "Status report," he said, his voice calm but commanding. Lieutenant Laura Hayes glanced up from her console. "Shields are holding steady. Weapon systems online. The plasma cannon is ready for deployment." Corporal Ryan Blake leaned forward in his seat, his hands gripping the controls tightly. "What about enemy forces?" he asked, his tone tense. "We've detected multiple ships in orbit," Laura replied, "and ground defenses are active. If we want to get close enough to fire the cannon, we'll need to disable those shields first." Daniel nodded. "Understood. Prepare the strike team. We'll breach their outer perimeter and plant explosives on the shield generators. Once they're down, we hit them with everything we've got." The plan was simple, but risky. A small infiltration team would land on the planet's surface, disguised as traders delivering supplies. Their mission was to sabotage the shield generators while the Eclipse kept the Velan fleet occupied in orbit. If everything went according to plan, the plasma cannon would deliver the final blow, obliterating the central command center and crippling the Velan presence on Kalos Prime. Dr. Emily Grant joined the infiltration team, insisting that her expertise was crucial to ensuring the explosives were placed correctly. Daniel initially resisted, knowing how dangerous the mission would be, but Grant refused to back down. "If this fails," she argued, "everything we've worked for will be lost. I'm not sitting this one out." In the end, Daniel relented, trusting her judgment. The team prepared quickly, arming themselves with weapons and gear scavenged from previous battles. They wore nondescript uniforms designed to blend in with civilian traders, though beneath their disguises, they carried enough firepower to level a city block. As the dropship descended toward the planet's surface, tension filled the cabin. No one spoke, each person lost in their own thoughts. Daniel gripped the armrest of his seat, replaying the plan in his mind. Every detail mattered. Even the smallest mistake could doom them all. Touchdown was smooth, the ship landing in a bustling spaceport surrounded by warehouses and docking bays. The infiltration team disembarked, blending seamlessly into the crowd of workers and merchants. Velan patrols moved past them, their insect-like helmets glinting under the artificial lights. For a moment, it seemed like they might slip through, unnoticed. But then trouble struck. A sharp-eyed guard stopped Ryan as he passed through a checkpoint. "Your credentials!" the Velan demanded, raising a weapon. Ryan froze, his hand inching toward his hidden blaster. Before he could act, Dr. Grant stepped forward, flashing a forged ID chip. "He's with me," she said smoothly. "We're here to deliver medical supplies." The guard hesitated, scanning the chip. After a tense moment, he nodded and waved them. Through. Ryan exhaled sharply, shooting Grant a grateful look. "Nice save," he muttered. "Don't thank me yet," she replied under her breath. "We're not out of the woods." Reaching the shield generators required navigating a labyrinth of tunnels and maintenance corridors. The team moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows and avoiding patrols. At times, they encountered automated sentries, which they disabled, silently using EMP grenades. Each step brought them closer to their objective, but also deeper into enemy territory. Finally, they reached the generator room. Massive machines hummed with energy, their surfaces glowing faintly as they powered. The planet's defenses. Grant immediately set to work, attaching explosive charges to key components. Her movements were precise, her focus unwavering despite the danger. "How long until these go off?" Daniel asked, keeping watch at the door. 5 minutes, Grant replied, double-checking her work. "Once the shields are down, the Eclipse can move in." Daniel nodded. "Good. Let's get out of here." But as they turned to leave, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and heavy footsteps echoed in the distance. The Veilans had discovered the sabotage. "Move!" Daniel shouted, leading the team into a sprint. They raced through the corridors, dodging patrols and returning fire when necessary. The explosions erupted behind them, shaking the ground and sending debris flying. The shield generators were down, but so was their cover. Now they were exposed, running for their lives as Valen reinforcements closed in. Above the planet, the Eclipse sprang into action. With the shields disabled, the ship unleashed its full arsenal, targeting key installations and drawing the attention of the Velan fleet. Energy blasts lit up the sky, turning the battlefield into a chaotic storm of light and sound. Laura coordinated the assault from the bridge, her voice steady as she issued commands. "Target the command center! Keep their fighters busy!" The Veilans fought back fiercely, launching waves of ships to intercept the Eclipse. But the human crew held their ground, their determination matching the enemy's ferocity. For every shot fired, for every life risked, they remembered why they were fighting, not just for survival, but for justice. Down on the surface, the infiltration team fought their way back to the dropship. By the time they reached it, the vessel was surrounded by Velan soldiers. Daniel raised his weapon, ready to charge, but before he could act, a deafening roar split the air. The plasma cannon fired. From high above, the beam of energy sliced through the atmosphere, striking the central command center with devastating force. The explosion was massive, engulfing the structure in flames and sending shockwaves rippling outward. The ground shook violently, knocking everyone off their feet. When the dust settled, silence fell over the battlefield. The Velan forces, stunned by the destruction, began to retreat. Their once impenetrable stronghold was in ruins, their morale shattered. Back aboard the Eclipse, the crew erupted in cheers. Tears streamed down faces as they embraced one another, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had accomplished. For the first time in centuries, humanity had delivered a decisive blow against the Veilans. They had shown that they were no longer helpless victims, they were warriors, united by a common cause. Daniel stood on the bridge, gazing at the burning wreckage of Kalos Prime. His heart was heavy with the cost of victory, but there was also pride, a quiet, fierce pride, in what they had achieved. Beside him, Laura placed a hand on his shoulder. "We did it," she said softly. "We burned their worlds." Daniel nodded, his jaw set. "This isn't the end," he replied. "It's just the beginning." Outside, the stars burned brightly, indifferent to the struggles of those who gazed upon them. Humanity had taken a stand, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they could rise from the ashes. And as the Eclipse sailed onward, carrying the hopes of a species determined to endure, the promise of a new dawn lingered in the air, a promise of freedom, renewal, and a future reclaimed. The asteroid base was in ruins, its once bustling corridors now silent and dark. The walls were scorched, the floors littered with debris. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the damaged structure. But despite the destruction, there was a sense of relief, a fragile, fleeting calm after the storm. Daniel stood on what remained of the observation deck, staring out at the void beyond. The view was hauntingly beautiful, with stars scattered, like diamonds against the blackness of space. Below, the wreckage of Veilon ships floated aimlessly, their twisted metal frames glinting faintly in the light of a distant sun. Humanity had struck a blow that would echo through the galaxy, but Daniel knew it wasn't enough. Laura joined him, her steps slow and deliberate. Her face was smudged with dirt, her uniform torn and bloodied. She looked as exhausted as he felt, but her green eyes still held a spark of determination. "We did it," she said softly, breaking the silence. "We actually did it." Daniel nodded, though his expression remained grim. "For now. But this isn't over. The Veilons won't stop until we're wiped out, or they are." Laura sighed, leaning against the railing beside him. "Do you think we can win? Really win?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But I do know one thing. Giving up isn't an option. Not now, not ever. If we lose hope, then everything we've fought for, all the sacrifices, all the lives lost, it'll mean nothing." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. They both understood the stakes. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that humanity could rise from the ashes and reclaim its place among the stars. But the road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges they couldn't yet imagine. In the days that followed, the survivors worked tirelessly to repair the damage and salvage what they could. Supplies were scarce, and many of the systems that had kept the base operational were beyond repair. Engineers rigged temporary solutions, cobbling together equipment from scraps and spare parts. It was far from ideal, but it was enough to keep them alive, for now. Dr. Emily Grant spent most of her time analyzing data from the battle, studying how the plasma cannon had performed under such extreme conditions. Though the weapon had been incomplete, it had exceeded expectations, obliterating several Veilon ships and forcing the rest to retreat. However, the strain of firing it had caused significant damage, and rebuilding it would take time and resources they didn't have. "We need to start over," Grant told Daniel during one of their meetings. "The prototype proved the concept works, but it's too unstable. If we want to build more cannons, and we will, we'll need better materials and more advanced facilities." Daniel nodded, already considering their options. "We'll send scouts to nearby systems, look for anything useful. Mining colonies, abandoned stations, even derelict ships. Whatever we can find, we take." It was a risky plan, but necessity left them no choice. Every colony, every outpost, every scrap of technology mattered now. Humanity's future depended on piecing together whatever they could from the wreckage of their past. Meanwhile, tensions within the group began to ease. The shared experience of surviving the attack had brought people closer together, forging bonds that transcended fear and doubt. Even Corporal Ryan Blake, who had clashed with Laura so often before, seemed to soften. He approached her one evening as she worked on repairing a damaged console. "Hey," he said, awkward, lopsided smile. I wanted to say thanks for having my back out there." Laura looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "You saved us too," she replied. "If you hadn't held them off, the cannon wouldn't have fired in time." Ryan shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, guess we make a pretty good team when we're not arguing." A small smile tugged at Laura's lips. "Don't get used to it." Their exchange was brief, but it marked a turning point. The divisions that had threatened to tear them apart were slowly healing, replaced by a newfound sense of unity. They weren't just soldiers or scientists. They were survivors, bound by a common purpose. As weeks turned into months, word of the victory spread to other human settlements. Messages arrived from distant colonies, offering support and pledging allegiance to the cause. Some sent supplies, others volunteers. A few even offered shelter, inviting refugees from the asteroid base to join their communities. It was a reminder that humanity was still capable of coming together, even in the darkest of times. Daniel addressed the growing coalition in a series of encrypted broadcasts, urging caution, but also hope. "This is only the beginning," he said during one transmission. "The Valens may be powerful, but they're not invincible. Together we can stand against them. Together we can reclaim what was taken from us." His words resonated with listeners across the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, humanity dared to dream of a future free from fear, a future where they could chart their own destiny. The final piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly. During a routine scouting mission, a team discovered an ancient human vessel drifting in the outer reaches of a nearby system. Its hull was battered and scarred, its systems offline, but inside, they found something extraordinary: intact archives, containing centuries' worth of knowledge and technology. It was a treasure trove, a glimpse into a world long forgotten. When the ship was towed back to the asteroid base, Dr. Grant wasted no time examining its contents. What she uncovered was staggering. Blueprints for advanced weapons, schematics for sustainable habitats, and records detailing Earth's greatest achievements. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to give humanity a second chance. "This changes everything," Grant said, her voice trembling with excitement. "With this information, we can rebuild not just weapons, but entire civilizations. We can create something new, something better." Daniel listened intently, his mind racing with possibilities. The discovery renewed his resolve, reigniting the fire that had driven him since the day the Valons burned Earth. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for renewal. Months later, the first fully operational plasma cannon was completed. It was mounted aboard the Eclipse, which had been retrofitted to serve as both a battleship and a mobile command center. The weapon was sleek and deadly, its design refined based on lessons learned from the prototype. Testing confirmed it was stable and reliable, ready to unleash devastation upon any enemy foolish enough to challenge humanity. Daniel gathered his crew for one last briefing before setting out. "This isn't just about revenge," he told them, his voice steady and firm. "It's about justice, for Earth, for everyone we've lost, for every life destroyed by the Valons. Today, we strike back. Today, we burn their worlds." The room erupted in cheers, the sound echoing through the corridors of the ship. As the Eclipse launched into the void, its engines roaring with power, Daniel stood on the bridge, watching. The stars streak past. Beside him, Laura placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. They didn't know what awaited them, whether triumph or tragedy lay ahead. But for the first time in 3,000 years, humanity faced the future with hope. Outnumbered, outgunned, and scarred by loss, they refused to surrender. Instead, they chose to fight, to rise, to reclaim their place among the stars. And as the eclipse disappeared into the endless expanse of space, it carried with it the dreams of a species determined to endure. For Earth, for humanity, for the promise of a new dawn. It was the middle of what passed for night on the asteroid base, though the distinction between day and night was meaningless in the endless void of space. The alarms blared suddenly, piercing the quiet and sending everyone scrambling. Red lights flashed across the corridors, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Daniel bolted upright from his bunk, his heart pounding as he grabbed his weapon and ran toward the command center. By the time he arrived, chaos had already taken hold. Soldiers rushed to their stations, shouting orders and checking monitors. On the main screen, a fleet of Valon ships loomed large, their sleek designs cutting through the darkness like predators stalking prey. They were close, too close. "How did they find us?" Laura demanded, her voice sharp with panic as she worked furiously at her console. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have time to think about how or why the Valons had discovered their location. All that mattered now was survival. "Seal off all entrances," he ordered. "Divert power to the shields and arm every soldier we've got. If they breach the perimeter, we fight." The crew sprang into action, their movements frantic but focused. Outside, the first wave of Velan fighters launched an assault, their energy blasts striking the asteroid's surface with devastating force. The base shook violently, throwing people off balance. Sparks flew from damaged equipment, and the air grew thick with smoke and tension. "We can't hold them off forever, Doctor," Emily Grant shouted over the noise. She clutched the case containing the blue crystal tightly, her face pale but determined. "If they get inside, everything we've worked for will be lost." Daniel turned to her, his jaw set. "Then we don't let them get inside." He activated the comm system, addressing the entire base. "This is Commander Hayes. We're under attack, but we're not giving up this place. Stand your ground, protect the cannon, and remember why we're here. For Earth, for humanity. Now move." The battle raged on for hours, each moment feeling like an eternity. The Valens were relentless, their forces overwhelming. Wave after wave of soldiers descended onto the asteroid, breaching the outer defenses and pushing deeper into the base. Humanity fought back with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. The enemy's numbers were too great, their weapons too advanced. In the heat of the fight, Daniel led a small team to reinforce one of the critical junctions. The corridor was narrow, lined with crates and debris that served as makeshift cover. Energy blasts ricocheted off the walls, filling the air with deafening cracks and flashes of light. Laura was by his side, her rifle steady as she fired shot after shot, taking down Valen's soldiers with precision. "Fall back!" Daniel yelled as the enemy advanced further. "We can't hold this position." Reluctantly, the team retreated, falling back to a secondary line of defense. Each step backward felt like a defeat, but Daniel reminded himself that losing the base wasn't an option. It was a death sentence. As they regrouped, he glanced at the faces of his comrades. Exhaustion and fear were etched into their features, but there was also resolve. They weren't ready to give up, not yet. Meanwhile, deep within the base, engineers worked feverishly to complete the plasma cannon. It was still unfinished, its systems untested, but desperation drove them to push harder than ever before. Dr. Grant supervised the final stages, her hands trembling as she connected wires and calibrated settings. "We're almost there," she said, her voice strained but hopeful. "Just a few more minutes." Corporal Ryan Blake stood nearby, guarding the entrance to the chamber. His rifle was raised, his eyes scanning the hallway for any sign of movement. He knew the Valens would target the cannon first. If they reached it, all hope would be lost. "Come on," Ryan muttered under his breath, glancing nervously at the door. "Hurry up." As if in response, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Ryan tightened his grip on his weapon, bracing himself for the inevitable clash. Moments later, a group of Valan soldiers appeared, their weapons blazing. Ryan returned fire, shouting for reinforcements as he fought to hold them off. Back at the command center, Daniel made a decision. The situation was dire, and conventional tactics weren't working. If they wanted to survive, they needed to take drastic measures. "Laura, prepare the cannon for launch," he ordered. "We'll use it as a last resort, even if it's not fully operational." Laura stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. "Are you sure? Firing it now could destroy the entire base." "I know the risks," Daniel replied grimly. "But if we wait any longer, we're dead anyway. Get it ready." Laura hesitated, then nodded, relaying the order to the engineering team. Meanwhile, Daniel rallied a group of soldiers for one final push, a desperate attempt to buy enough time. "For the cannon to charge, listen up," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "This is it. We hold the line no matter what. If we fall fighting. For humanity, for Earth." The soldiers cheered, their spirits lifted by his words. Together they charged into the fray, meeting the Valans head-on in a brutal, chaotic battle. The corridor became a war zone, filled with shouts, explosions, and the acrid smell of burning metal. Every second felt like a lifetime, but Daniel refused to falter. He fired his weapon with deadly accuracy, taking down enemies while keeping his team moving forward. In the chamber housing the plasma cannon, Dr. Grant gave the signal. "It's ready," she shouted. "Fire it now!" Ryan, who had been holding off the Valens single-handedly, stumbled back into the room, blood dripping from a wound on his arm. "Do it!" he yelled, collapsing against the wall. Laura pressed the activation button, her hands shaking. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the cannon came to life. A beam of pure energy erupted from its barrel, slicing through the asteroid's surface and into the Valon fleet above. Ships exploded in brilliant bursts of light, their wreckage tumbling into the void. The shockwave from the cannon rippled through the base, knocking everyone off their feet. The structure groaned under the strain, threatening to collapse. Smoke filled the air, and alarms screamed louder than ever. "It worked," Laura whispered, staring at the carnage outside. "We actually did it." But the victory was bittersweet. The asteroid base was in ruins, its defenses shattered, and its resources depleted. Many lives had been lost, and those who remained were battered and broken. Still, they had survived, and they had struck a blow against the Valons that would not soon be forgotten. Daniel limped into the chamber, his body bruised and bleeding. He looked at the others, his expression a mix of pride and sorrow. "We held the line," he said quietly, "and we showed them that we're not afraid to fight back." No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Outside, the stars burned brightly, indifferent to the struggles of those who gazed upon them. For now, humanity had survived, but the cost of victory weighed heavily on their shoulders. The days that followed were a blur of activity. The Eclipse had docked at a hidden asteroid base, one of the few safe havens left for humanity. Inside the base, engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to decode the information stored in the crystals. Every hour brought new discoveries, each more astonishing than the last. But progress was slow, and tensions ran high. Daniel spent most of his time overseeing operations, ensuring that every resource was being used efficiently. The asteroid base was small, its corridors narrow and dimly lit. Supplies were limited, and the air carried a faint metallic tang that reminded everyone of how fragile their existence truly was. Despite the challenges, Daniel pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. Dr. Emily Grant remained at the center of the effort, her focus unwavering. She pored over the blueprints for the plasma cannon, studying every detail with meticulous care. The weapon was unlike anything humanity had ever built before. Its design was elegant, yet terrifying in its complexity. It required materials that were rare and difficult to obtain, and assembling it would take months, even under the best conditions. "We're going to need help," Grant admitted during one of their meetings. "Not just engineers, but miners, technicians, anyone who can contribute. Building this isn't going to be easy." Daniel nodded, already aware of the problem. Diverting resources meant taking food, fuel, and medical supplies away from civilian colonies. Many of those settlements were barely surviving as it was. Asking them to sacrifice more felt like asking too much. But what choice did they have? Without the plasma cannon, humanity would remain vulnerable to the Valons. "We'll make it work," Daniel said firmly. "We'll find a way to balance the needs of the project with the needs of the people. If we don't, none of us will survive. Anyway." Laura stood nearby, her arms crossed. She had been quiet during the meeting, her expression troubled. When Daniel caught her eye, she stepped forward. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice low. "You know what building something like this could mean for us, for our future. Are we ready to cross that line?" Daniel sighed. He knew exactly what she meant. Creating a weapon capable of destroying entire planets came with moral consequences. Could they justify using such power even if it was in self-defense? Would wielding it make them any better than the Valens? I don't know if we're ready, Daniel admitted, but we don't have the luxury of waiting. If we hesitate, the Valens will crush us. This might be our only chance to tip the scales in our favor. Laura didn't argue further, but her silence spoke volumes. She trusted her brother's judgment, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. As the weeks passed, cracks began to form within the team. Corporal Ryan Blake grew increasingly impatient, frustrated by the slow progress. He believed that humanity should strike back immediately, without waiting for the plasma cannon to be completed. During one heated discussion, he voiced his opinion, loudly. "Why are we wasting time building this thing when we could hit the Valens now?" Ryan demanded, slamming his fist on the table. "We've got ships, weapons, soldiers. We don't need some fancy cannon to win." "That's not true," Laura shot back, her tone sharp. "Without a decisive advantage, we'd be walking into a slaughter. You want revenge? Fine. But reckless attacks won't get us anywhere." Ryan glared at her, his face red with anger. "And sitting here twiddling our thumbs, Will? By the time this cannon's ready, the Valans could wipe us out 10 times over." Daniel stepped between them, his presence commanding attention. "Enough," he said, his voice firm. "Arguing isn't going to solve anything. We stick to the plan. That's final." Ryan muttered something under his breath, but backed down, though his resentment lingered. The incident left a sour taste in the room, highlighting the growing divide among the crew. Some shared Ryan's desire for swift action, while others sided with Laura's cautious approach. Daniel found himself caught in the middle, trying to hold the group together despite their differences. Amid the tension, there were moments of hope. Dr. Grant made significant progress decoding the crystals, uncovering not only technical plans but also fragments of Earth's history. These glimpses into the past were both inspiring and heartbreaking. They revealed a world rich with culture, innovation, and beauty, a stark contrast to the desolation humanity now called home. One evening, Daniel joined Grant in the lab, where she was reviewing a newly translated file. On the screen was an image of a bustling city, its skyline filled with towering buildings and glowing lights. People walked along wide streets, smiling and laughing, oblivious to the tragedy that would one day befall them. "They really did have it all, didn't they?" Daniel said softly, staring at the image. Grant nodded, her eyes misty. "Yes, they did. And we carry their legacy with us, whether we realize it or not. What we do now, how we choose to move forward, it matters. Not just for us, but for the memory of everyone we've lost." Her words stayed with Daniel long after he left the lab. They reminded him of why he had taken on this burden in the first place. It wasn't just about survival, it was about reclaiming what had been stolen and proving that humanity still had a place in the universe. Despite the internal strife, the project moved forward. Engineers assembled components for the plasma cannon in secret, working around the clock to meet tight deadlines. Miners ventured into dangerous asteroid fields to gather rare metals, risking their lives to ensure the project's success. Slowly, but surely, the pieces began to come together. Then, disaster struck. A supply convoy en route to the asteroid base was ambushed by Valon forces. The attack was swift and brutal, leaving no survivors. When news reached the base, panic spread like wildfire. Rumors circulated that the Valons had discovered their location and were planning a full-scale assault. Daniel called an emergency meeting to address the situation. The room was packed, filled with worried faces and whispered conversations. When Daniel stood to speak, the room fell silent. "We don't know for sure if the Valens are coming," he began, his voice steady. "But we can't afford to take chances. Everyone needs to prepare for the possibility of an attack." "What about the cannon?" someone asked. "If they find us before, it's finished. We're dead." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "I won't lie to you. The risk is real, but giving up isn't an option. We've come too far to turn back now. So here's what we're going to do. Double the guard shifts, fortify the base, and keep working on the cannon. If the Vaylans show up, we'll fight. And if they manage to break through, we'll make sure they regret it." His words inspired a mix of determination and fear. Some cheered, eager to defend their home, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Laura watched her brother closely, seeing the weight of leadership etched into his face. She wanted to say something, to offer comfort or support, but she knew there was nothing she could say that would ease the burden he carried. In the days that followed, the base transformed into a fortress. Barricades were erected, weapons were distributed, and drills were conducted nonstop. Morale remained fragile, but the sense of purpose kept everyone moving forward. Even Ryan seemed to channel his frustration into action, volunteering for extra patrols and training sessions. Meanwhile, the plasma cannon took shape. Its frame was massive, designed to be mounted on a ship or planet surface. Engineers tested its systems piece by piece, ensuring that every component functioned perfectly. Though incomplete, the weapon already exuded an aura of raw power. One night, as Daniel walked through the base, he paused to watch the engineers at work. The sight of the cannon filled him with conflicting emotions. On one hand, it represented hope, a chance to turn the tide against the Vaylans. On the other hand, it symbolized the cost of survival, the sacrifices and compromises humanity had been forced to make. "Do you think it'll work?" a voice asked behind him. Daniel turned to see Laura standing there, her expression thoughtful. He smiled faintly. "It has to," he replied. "Because if it doesn't, I don't know what comes next." Laura nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. Together they stood in silence, watching as humanity's last hope slowly came to life. Outside, the stars burned brightly, indifferent to the struggles of those who gazed upon them. For now the base remained safe, but everyone knew that peace was fleeting and the storm was inevitable. The tremor grew stronger, shaking the walls of the underground vault. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the faint glow of the crystals seemed to flicker as if reacting to the chaos above. Daniel clenched his fists, his mind racing. They had found what they came for, but now the Vaylans were closing in. Every second counted. "Grab everything you can carry," Daniel ordered, his voice firm despite the rising tension. "We don't have time to waste." Dr. Emily Grant moved quickly, stuffing the glowing blue crystal into a protective case and securing it to her belt. The other soldiers began loading crates with data crystals and metallic discs, their movements hurried but deliberate. Laura stayed close to the entrance, keeping watch with her weapon drawn. Her eyes darted back and forth, scanning the shadows beyond the doorway. "We need to hurry," she called out. "I hear engines. They're landing." Daniel nodded grimly. He didn't need to ask how many ships there were or how many Vaylans were coming. It didn't matter. Whether it was 10 or 100, they couldn't afford to let the enemy take these artifacts. Whatever secrets they held, they belonged to humanity, not the aliens who had destroyed Earth. As the team finished packing, another tremor shook the ground, this one more violent than the last. A section of the ceiling collapsed, sending chunks of rock tumbling down. One of the soldiers cried out as debris narrowly missed him, but no one stopped moving. They knew what was at stake. "Move out!" Daniel shouted, leading the way toward the exit. The group emerged into the harsh light of the alien sun, blinking against the glare. The scene outside was chaotic. Vaylan ships hovered above the dig site, their sleek designs cutting through the sky like blades. Soldiers clad in black armor poured out of the vessels, weapons raised and ready. Their insect-like helmets glinted ominously in the sunlight, and their movements were precise, almost mechanical. Take cover, Laura yelled, diving behind a nearby rock formation. The others followed suit, scattering to avoid the hail of energy blasts that erupted from the Veilon. Weapons! The air crackled with electricity as the shots struck the ground, leaving scorch marks on the barren surface. Daniel crouched low, gripping his rifle tightly. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help them now. "Blake, Grant, stay with me," Daniel said, motioning for the two to join him. "Laura, cover our retreat." Laura nodded, firing off a series of shots to keep the Veilons at bay. Her aim was steady, each blast striking true and forcing the enemy to duck for cover. Meanwhile, Daniel led Dr. Grant and Corporal Ryan Blake toward the edge of the dig site, where the Eclipse awaited. The ship wasn't far, but reaching it would be difficult under fire. "Keep moving," Daniel urged, pushing forward despite the chaos around them. Ryan glanced over his shoulder, his face pale with fear. "They're gaining on us," he shouted. "There's too many of them." Daniel gritted his teeth. Ryan was right. The Veilons were advancing rapidly, their superior numbers overwhelming, but giving up wasn't an option. Not when they had come so far. "Just keep going," Daniel snapped. "We're not losing this fight." Dr. Grant stumbled slightly, nearly dropping the case containing the blue crystal. Daniel reached out to steady her, his grip firm but reassuring. "Stay focused," he told her. "We need those crystals intact." Grant nodded, clutching the case tighter. Despite her age, she showed remarkable resilience, refusing to let fear slow her down. Daniel admired her determination, even as the situation grew more dire. Finally, they reached the relative safety of the Eclipse. The ship's ramp lowered, and the remaining crew members rushed to help load the crates of artifacts aboard. Laura joined them moments later, her breathing ragged but her expression resolute. "That was too close," she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he turned to survey the battlefield. The Veilons had regrouped and were advancing steadily, their weapons trained on the ship. There was no time to rest. They needed to leave, and fast. "Get us out of here, Daniel barked to the pilot. The engines roared to life, and the Eclipse lifted off the ground just as the first wave of Veilon fire hit its hull. Sparks flew inside the cabin as the ship shuddered under the impact, but the shields held strong. Within moments, they were soaring into the sky, leaving the enemy behind. Back aboard the Eclipse, the mood was tense. Everyone was exhausted, their nerves frayed from the close call. The team gathered in the briefing room, where Dr. Grant immediately set to work analyzing the artifacts they had retrieved. The glowing blue crystal sat on the table in front of her, its light pulsing softly like a heartbeat. "This is extraordinary," she murmured, her fingers flying over the keys of her portable computer. These crystals contain vast amounts of data, blueprints, schematics, even historical records. Some of this information hasn't been seen since before Earth fell. Daniel leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What kind of blueprints?" Grant hesitated, then brought up an image on the screen. It showed a massive weapon, a plasma cannon unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Its design was sleek yet intimidating, with multiple barrels and intricate mechanisms that suggested immense power. This could change everything," Grant said, her voice trembling with awe. "It's a weapon capable of obliterating entire planets. If we can reconstruct it, we might finally have a chance against the Veilons." A heavy silence fell over the room. The implications of what Grant had just revealed were staggering. Such a weapon could tip the scales in humanity's favor, giving them the upper hand in their endless struggle for survival. But it also raised troubling questions. Was building such a device worth the risk? Could humanity wield such destructive power without becoming monsters themselves? Ryan broke the silence, his tone defiant. "Then let's build it. Let's show those bastards what happens when you mess with us." Laura shot him a sharp look. Are you serious? Do you even realize what you're saying? Using something like that, it's no different than what the Valans did to Earth. It's not the same thing, Ryan argued. We'd be using it to protect ourselves, to make sure we never get wiped out again. Isn't that worth it? Daniel listened to the argument unfold, his mind racing. He understood both sides. Ryan's anger was fueled by years of loss and frustration, while Laura's caution stemmed from a desire to avoid repeating history. As commander, it was his responsibility to find a balance between the two. Enough, Daniel said finally, his voice cutting through the tension. We don't have time to debate this right now. What matters is that we have a chance, a real chance to fight back. But we need to think carefully about how we use it. He turned to Dr. Grant. How long would it take to build one of these cannons? Grant hesitated, clearly weighing her words. Months at least. And we'll need resources, materials, engineers, facilities. It won't be easy, especially given how stretched thin we already are. Daniel nodded slowly. He had expected as much. Rebuilding humanity's strength would require sacrifices, and not everyone would agree with the choices he made. But hesitation wasn't an option. If they waited too long, the Valans might strike again, and next time, they might not escape unscathed. We'll start working on it immediately, Daniel decided. Divert whatever resources we can spare, and keep this quiet. We don't want word getting out until we're ready. The team dispersed, each person carrying their own thoughts about what lay ahead. For Daniel, the weight of leadership pressed harder than ever. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, both external and internal. But deep down, he knew one thing for certain. Humanity couldn't survive forever by running and hiding. Sometimes the only way to move forward was to stand your ground and fight. Outside the ship's windows, the stars burned brightly against the void. Somewhere among them, the Valans lurked, watching and waiting. But for now, humanity had taken a step toward reclaiming its future, and Daniel Hayes intended to see that future through no matter the cost. The moon was quiet, as it always was. It hung in the endless blackness of space, orbiting a dying star that flickered weakly in the distance. The surface of the moon was barren, covered in gray dust and jagged rocks. No wind stirred, no sound broke the silence. This was a place where life should not exist, yet here humanity clung to survival. Commander Daniel Hayes stood on the observation deck of the battleship Eclipse. His boots clicked softly against the metal floor as he paced back and forth. Outside, the large windows, the stars stretched endlessly, cold and distant. He stopped for a moment and stared at the holographic map floating in front of him. It showed dozens of red dots scattered across the galaxy, enemy territories controlled by the Valans. They were the ones who had destroyed Earth 3,000 years ago. They were the reason humanity now lived like this, scattered and hiding. Daniel sighed and ran a hand through his short brown hair. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The Valans had been quiet for centuries, content to leave humanity alone while they ruled over their vast empire. But now, something had changed. Reports had come in from one of the outer colonies. A scout fleet of Valan ships had been spotted nearby. They weren't just passing through. They were searching for something. "Commander," a voice called out behind him. Daniel turned to see his younger sister, Lieutenant Laura Hayes, walking toward him. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, and her green eyes were sharp and focused. She carried a datapad in one hand, her expression grim. Daniel knew that look. It meant trouble. "What is it?" he asked, already bracing himself for bad news. Laura handed him the datapad. "We've confirmed it. The Valans are near Outpost Delta 7. They're scanning the area, digging through old ruins." Daniel frowned as he looked at the information on the screen. Outpost Delta 7 wasn't just any colony. It was built on top of an ancient site, one of the few places where traces of Earth's past still remained. Ruins buried deep beneath the ground held fragments of human history, pieces of a world that had been burned to ashes. And if the Valens were there, it meant they were looking for something specific. "Do we know what they're after?" Daniel asked, his voice low. "Not yet," Laura replied. "But you know what this means. If they find anything at all, it could give them an advantage. We can't let that happen." Daniel nodded slowly. He knew she was right. The Valans were ruthless, efficient, and technologically superior. Humanity had barely survived their last encounter 3 millennia ago. Now, with so few resources and so little hope, another attack could mean the end of everything. He glanced at Laura, remembering how much they had lost because of the Valans. Their parents had died during a raid when Daniel was just a teenager, and Laura had only been a child. That day had shaped both of them, driving Daniel to become a soldier and Laura to follow in his footsteps. They had dedicated their lives to protecting what was left of humanity. But sometimes, Daniel wondered if it was enough. "We need to move quickly," Daniel said finally. "If the Valans are sniffing around those ruins, we have to get there first." Laura hesitated, then nodded. "I'll start assembling a team, but Daniel, be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with." Daniel gave her a small smile. "When are we ever careful?" Despite his attempt at humor, the tension between them was palpable. They both knew the risks. The Valans were dangerous, and going up against them was like stepping into a lion's den. But they didn't have a choice. If the enemy found whatever secrets lay hidden in those ruins, it could spell disaster for humanity. The journey to Outpost Delta 7 took several days. The Eclipse traveled silently through the void, its engines humming softly as it approached the colony. Daniel spent most of the time reviewing plans and strategizing with his crew. He wanted to make sure they were prepared for anything. When they arrived, the scene was eerily quiet. The outpost itself was small, consisting of a handful of domed structures connected by narrow tunnels. Most of the colonists had already been evacuated, leaving behind only a skeleton crew to maintain the facility. Outside, the landscape was bleak and desolate, dotted with craters and jagged rocks. Daniel led a team of soldiers onto the surface, their boots crunching against the loose gravel. The air was thin, requiring everyone to wear breathing apparatuses. As they made their way toward the excavation site, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He scanned the horizon, but there was no sign of movement. At the dig site, they found evidence of recent activity. Tools lay scattered on the ground and sections of the ruins had been exposed. Clearly, the Valans had been here. And they hadn't left long ago. "Looks like we got lucky," Corporal Ryan Blake muttered as he examined the area. Ryan was young and impulsive, often letting his emotions get the better of him. But he was loyal, and Daniel trusted him to follow orders, even if he didn't always agree with them. "Luck has nothing to do with it," Laura said sharply. "They'll be back. We need to secure whatever they were looking for before they return." Daniel nodded. "Split up and search the area. Look for anything unusual. If the Valans wanted something badly enough to send a scout fleet, it must be important." The team spread out, carefully inspecting every inch of the site. It wasn't long before one of the soldiers called out, "Over here! I think I found something!" Everyone rushed over to where the soldier was standing. Beneath a layer of dirt and debris, they discovered a heavy metal door embedded in the ground. It was rusted and worn, but the insignia etched into its surface was unmistakable, a symbol of Earth's old military forces. Daniel knelt down and brushed away more dirt, revealing a keypad beside the door. "This must lead to some kind of underground vault," he said. "Dr. Grant, can you get this open?" Dr. Emily Grant, the ship's chief scientist, stepped forward. She was older than the others, with graying hair and glasses perched on her nose. Despite her age, she moved with purpose, pulling a device from her belt and attaching it to the keypad. After a few moments, the door hissed open, revealing a dark passageway beyond. Inside, the air was stale and cool. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with strange artifacts, data crystals, metallic discs, and other objects whose purpose was unclear. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, holding a single crystal glowing faintly with blue light. This is incredible, Dr. Grant whispered, her eyes wide with awe. These crystals contain information from Earth's final days. If we can decode them, we might learn things we thought were lost forever. Daniel felt a mix of excitement and unease. What secrets did these crystals hold, and would they help humanity or put them in even greater danger? As the team began gathering the artifacts, a sudden tremor shook the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling, and alarms blared in the distance. "They're here," Laura said, gripping her weapon tightly. Daniel nodded, his jaw set. "Let's move. We're not leaving without those crystals." And with that, the race against time truly began.